Qualitative and quantitative methods, how to choose. These are not alternative things. So it's less a one versus the other. For each use case, there is a clear decision on which class of method you should choose from. So a use case in this setting is the research question open to answer. So both classes are on very different ends of the spectrum in terms of some characteristics. So quantitative studies, as the name suggests, are on a high quantity of data records. For example, more than 500 records. These are usually collected with low touch and efforts via software and automation from the participants. In qualitative studies, on the other hand, they have a low sample size, for example 10 recordings, and those were gathered in a high effort, so for example face-to-face interviews. Be careful here. The amount of information stored in this kind of studies is very high in both cases. In one case, the quantitative case, they are very standardized and uniform, but in most cases rather small. In the qualitative case, they are very detailed, unstructured and rather long, so don't get tricked by this. It's about the width of the data and the depth of the data. There are methods that can be implemented more on the qualitative or the quantitative side, but at latest, when doing the analysis, you will see the side they belong to. And the second thing, especially for beginners, there's a high temptation of changing the game to a high sample size and high touch data collection. This leads to ridiculous expensive studies and in the end to a high price for the research question. The quantitative studies are on tight question with a limited amount of answers. So in most cases, it's about decisions and measuring metrics to take measures. So all more analytical, behavioral or very standardized studies fit in here. On very open research questions, where it's about exploring a topic or a prototype, qualitative methods give you a lot of explorative insights about the context, about interaction and about the target group. So a great deep dive to learning and understanding is the key here. The analysis. Because of the characteristic working with the different gathered data, it's completely different in both cases. On the quantitative studies, it's more about handling numbers and working with graphs, charts and statistics. Because of the way the data is structured, it's fairly a thing close to mathematics. But don't underestimate the importance of the right view of the researcher to derive the correct conclusions and look on the relevant segments. The qualitative analysis is a lot more working on the details by reading through the recording and do coding of sections of quotes and interpretations. So this is a very time-consuming process today. So the researchers sift through all the data and identify the highlights. But in the end, they have a great insight with detailed evidence as a strong support to work on. As a side note here, our tool Considerly is made to support this process, so make sure to check it out. The application of the methods. As mentioned before, the application of quantitative approaches is often in decision making. So like in surveys with limited choices to know the preferences of a target group, or the typical application is the A/B testing on variants to identify which one is better performing to proceed. Or on the qualitative approach, interviews and prototypes or usability testings are very common to get in-depth feedback. So how do they combine? They combine very well. So not in parallel, but in sequence. So use one of them to get input for a follow-up study with the other one. So in one case, use a qualitative first study to get explorative insights and derive insights. To validate whether they are significant within the target group, a quantitative study helps to get strong confidence for the management, for example. Or the other way around, a quantitative study to gather data on hypotheses, problems, or behavior and their frequency. So based on these, you can decide on which you want to do a qualitative study, do interviews to get behind the reasons for this. A very common thing is if you think about noticeable problems you spotted in analytics data and you want to dig deeper in a qualitative study. This was my very basic classification explanation of qualitative and quantitative methods in general. I dig deeper into these methods themselves in other videos. I hope this helps you so far to get some basics straight on your next study. If you need more explanations on research basics, check out our YouTube playlist, the channel itself, and make sure to subscribe if you want to stay up to date. So long, happy researching.